Captain Aurelia Morrow stood on the bridge of the UHS Devastator, arms folded, eyes fixed on the starlit viewport. Framed by the swirling expanse of deep space was the Bylora sector, a region once renowned for its lush planets, unique trade goods, and warm, welcoming inhabitants. Now, sensor readings revealed a cluster of Dalek warships prowling like predators. For centuries, the Dalek Armada had earned a cruel reputation, conquering entire star systems, enslaving populations, and leaving only rubble for those who resisted. At the mention of Dalek ships, most species ran for cover, their knees knocking so hard you'd think a pair of enthusiastic drummers had taken up residence in their trousers. But Captain Morrow had no such inclination to flee. She'd received repeated warnings from the Galactic Council: humanity, stand down, do not engage, you're not ready. The usual refrain directed at upstart species that hadn't been spacefaring as long as the ancient empires. She pressed her lips into a thin smile. Humanity might be relatively new to interstellar politics, but the Devastator wasn't named out of humility. It bristled with weapons no one else had yet imagined, shield technology so advanced that it had given half the engineers on Earth insomnia. Rumors said the Devastator's hardware could punch a hole in a neutron star if it got moody enough. Aurelia had been reviewing the last transmissions from Byloran refugees. The incoming feed was garbled, pocked with static, but the frantic pleas were unmistakable. Drail, pounding, help. Her first officer, Commander Rhett Voss, stood at her side, wincing at each new scream. With a short nod, Captain Morrow signaled for the Devastator to drop from faster than light. The local star's glare lit the hull, revealing a sleek, obsidian cruiser sporting the emblem of a stylized phoenix on its prow. "Captain, Dalek vessels on intercept course," Red announced. "Looks like a welcoming party of 5 heavy cruisers and, my apologies, Captain, some ugly bastard in a flagship that's bigger than my ex's appetite for weird bedroom roleplay." Aurelia arched an eyebrow. "Your personal life aside, Commander, let's make a good first impression." She allowed herself a wicked grin. They're about to find out exactly what they've been missing when it comes to human hospitality. On the Devastator's lower decks, the ship's corridors bustled with tense activity. Sigmar Sigliota, a young stowaway nobody had noticed boarding at Earth's last military port, slipped behind a stack of supply crates. His heart pounded like a faulty thruster coil. Sig had lost his family to a Dalek attack on Grix's colony, another world the Council had deemed unworthy of official protection. Burning with grief, Sig had stowed away to do one thing: avenge his homeworld. This warship, rumored to be unstoppable, was his ticket. Let the Devastator be his hammer of retribution, and he would be its anvil. "Attention, Dalek Command," Aurelia's voice resonated across the vacuum of open space, broadcast in every frequency the Dalek might hear. "This is Captain Aurelia Morrow of the United Human Systems. Your siege of the Bylora sector ends now. Withdraw immediately or face consequences." The Dalek replied with static-laden roars and the growl of electronic feedback. Their commander, an overlord named Zavris Kull, made it known that the Devastator was trespassing. Captain Morrow half expected a challenge to a duel, but evidently, the Dalek had run out of patience with feeble alliances in this part of the galaxy. "Power up the main cannons," Aurelia said. Her voice was calm as she turned her gaze to the strategic display. "Load the quantum lance arrays. We're about to show these bastards what fresh Terran technology looks like." From the outside, the Dalek cruisers assumed they had cornered a naive upstart. After all, even the name human sounded unimpressive to them. In moments, though, the Devastator's lances hissed out beams of crackling azure light. In one swift barrage, 2 Dalek warships were reduced to drifting, molten husks. Shock rippled through the enemy formation. Their scrambler channels erupted in chaotic howls. One second they were reading a single Terran vessel, the next they'd lost a pair of unstoppable cruisers that had previously laid waste to entire civilizations. "Commander Voss, keep the forward arrays on the next target. Helm, maintain distance and give them a taste of our maneuverability." Aurelia's tone was unwavering. "We're only just getting started." In that single, devastating salvo, the Dalek realized the old stories about humans were incomplete. They had expected a docile species, eager to please. Instead, they found an apex predator armed with next-generation weaponry and an attitude to match. The Bylora sector might be cowering in fear, but if the Devastator had its way, that fear would soon belong solely to the Dalek. The bridge's lighting pulsed red as the Devastator went into high alert. Amid the cacophony of tactical readouts, Captain Aurelia Morrow stood rooted in place, fingers tapping on the railing. The Dalek, though reeling from their initial losses, were regrouping. Reports indicated 2 more heavy cruisers inbound, possibly with reinforcements lurking just outside sensor range. The Bylora sector's fate hung on a razor's edge. Below decks, in a secluded laboratory with claustrophobic walls and the faint smell of singed metal, Dr. Elise Harkin wrestled with her conscience. She had orchestrated the design of the ship's quantum cascade reactor, a revolutionary power source that no other species possessed. Rumor had it that the project's previous prototypes had more meltdown scares than a hungover cargo pilot with gambling debts. Elise remembered them all too vividly, nights of sweaty, anxious labor, scrawling calculations at 3 in the morning. She'd once joked that the reactor was like giving a puppy the ability to fire lasers from its butt, adorably terrifying and likely to cause accidents. Standing behind her, Sig Leota lurked in an alcove, as invisible as he could be while still wearing a tattered flight jacket. He had spent the past hour eavesdropping. Though he was just a stowaway with a tragic backstory, Sig was no fool. The Devastator's power output wasn't just strong. It was borderline unnatural. The ship could theoretically vaporize an armada if someone like Dr. Harkin lost her moral filter. And that possibility both thrilled and frightened him. Elise, unaware of her observer, pored over diagnostic readings. Every time the Devastator fired its quantum lance, the reactor's output spiked dangerously close to meltdown levels. If just one cooling system malfunctioned, they could all be blasted into cosmic dust. She rubbed the tension at her temples. This was the price of unstoppable power. It demanded a caretaker's vigilance, lest it devour its own creators. A sudden alarm jolted Sig from his hiding spot. Over the ship-wide intercom, Commander Voss announced, "Dalek vessels regrouped, closing in. Captain Morrow requests all hands to battle stations." Elise shut down her console and headed for the exit, only to nearly trip over Sig as he tried to dart away. "How did," she began, then shook her head. "You're not on the crew manifest." A flicker of defiance flashed in his eyes. "My world was destroyed by the Dalek. If you can blast them to hell, I want in." Elise considered the young man's trembling fists. She remembered the old Terran saying, "Desperate times call for desperate measures." Maybe, just maybe, having an extra set of eyes, especially from someone who carried such personal vendettas, could help. She handed him a small data tablet. "All right, stowaway. Here. Keep track of the reactor's thermal spikes. If we cross the threshold, you let me know immediately." Up on the command deck, the Devastator unleashed another barrage, targeting the largest Dalek cruiser. Captain Morrow's calm voice echoed in the orchestrated chaos, "Increase power to the forward shields. Timing is critical. Once we break their formation, we'll drive them back from Bylora." She cast a sidelong look at the tactical screen, where the Dalek reinforcements were swooping in like metallic vultures. "Commander Voss, is it me, or are these Dalek lumps more stubborn than an interstellar rash?" Voss smirked. "They sure do cling. I'd compare them to my ex again, but that'd be an insult to the Dalek." The Devastator pitched, rotating to face the new wave. Quantum lances flared once more. Particle beams illuminated the darkness with brilliant streaks of violent color. The Dalek ships wove a frantic pattern, weaving in and out of each other's protective fields to avoid the punishing barrage. Then, a new reading flickered across the Devastator's sensors. A Dalek capital ship, far larger than the rest, had arrived on the edge of the battlefield. "Captain," Voss muttered, swallowing hard, "that's the Worldbreaker. If half the rumors are true, that thing has enough firepower to incinerate an entire continental plate." Aurelia inhaled sharply. This was the Dralek's big gun. All right, she said, glancing at the reactor readouts with a simmer of concern. We can't risk the entire Devastator going nuclear on us. But if that behemoth tries to barbecue the Bylora colonies, we won't have a choice. Down in the lab, Elise and Sig worked feverishly, scanning for weaknesses in the Dralek's energy signatures. Their shield technology had a known blind spot, or so the rumors went. If they could pinpoint it, the Devastator might break the Dralek lines before the Worldbreaker had time to spool up its planet-killing weapons. Brace yourselves, Aurelia's voice boomed over the intercom. We're about to push this reactor to its limit. We either find their Achilles heel, or we risk turning ourselves into a cosmic fireworks display. Outside, the Dralek advanced. Inside, the Devastator's reactor hummed with a terrifying, almost sentient intensity. Humanity's hidden edge, unmatched technology, and a willingness to use it, was on full display. The only question was whether it would be enough to outgun a battle-hardened foe that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. In the midst of flaring weapons and emergency alarms, Captain Aurelia Morrow strategized like a grandmaster. The Dralek's Worldbreaker loomed, its cannons humming with lethal anticipation. If they didn't act fast, the entire Bylora sector would be converted into one massive crater. A hush fell on the Devastator's bridge, as though even the consoles feared to speak. Commander Rhett Voss swept aside a holographic display. Captain, the Dralek formation is aligning for a broadside. They'll send a volley our way that could crack our shields. Aurelia lifted her chin. Then we won't be here when they fire. Helm, set course for Esmir Prime, max sublight. Her eyes sparkled with cunning. We'll lure the Dralek into that ion storm in orbit. It's a hazard, but it might scramble their targeting long enough for us to get the jump. Amid the hum of the reactor, the Devastator accelerated toward Esmir Prime, a swirling gas giant wreathed in emerald lightning storms. Dralek ships gave chase, their war drums echoing across comms. The battlefield shifted from open space to the planet's tumultuous magnetosphere, where arcs of plasma danced across hull plating. Down in the lab, Sig Leota's eyes darted between the reactor status and the ship's trajectory. We're heading into an ion storm, he asked, looking at Dr. Elise Harkin in alarm. Is the captain nuts? She's brilliant, Elise murmured, rerouting power flows. And maybe a little nuts, but that's how great battles are won. She paused, her pulse pounding in her ears. If the storm's interference flared at the wrong time, the quantum cascade reactor could surge uncontrollably. But staying in open space against a superior Dralek force was an even deadlier gambit. On the bridge, the Devastator's exterior cameras relayed an awe-inspiring scene, a swirl of green and turquoise clouds crackling with energy, pummeling nearby Dralek frigates. Smaller ships, battered by the intense electromagnetic fields, spiraled out of formation. Captain Morrow seized the opportunity. Fire main cannons, full spread. Quantum lance beams tore into the disarrayed Dralek vessels. Explosions flared like miniature suns, bright enough to temporarily blind remote sensors. The Dralek survivors lurched in frustration. Their flagship, the dreaded Worldbreaker, kept a safe distance, but its weapons struggled to lock onto the Devastator's position through the swirling vortex. This was the window Morrow had bet her entire hand on. Commander Voss, patch me through to the Byloran defensive militia, she ordered. An older Byloran officer's tense voice came over the line, accompanied by the crackle of static. Captain Morrow explained the plan, how the Devastator would keep the Dralek pinned in the storm zone while the militia evaluated civilians and regrouped for a joint strike. The Byloran officers sounded both elated and petrified. Never before had they stood a chance against the Dralek. Suddenly, one Terran warship had changed the game. The Dralek recognized the trap too late. Captain Aurelia Morrow was in her element, ordering the Devastator to weave through ionic discharges, popping in and out of coverage. Each shot hammered Dralek cruisers, while the Worldbreaker struggled to find stable firing solutions. The Armada's once cohesive might was splintered, forced into pockets of confusion as the storm battered them from all sides. Then, in a final gambit, Zavras Kul, the Dalek overlord commanding the Worldbreaker, charged a doomsday barrage. Enough energy to incinerate half a planet built up along the warship's underside cannons, crackling in a menacing red glow. Through the static, Kul's message boomed on all frequencies: "You dare defy the Dalek? We shall snuff you out and the entire Bylora sector with you." Aurelia's face hardened. She wasn't about to let that happen. Over the lab's intercom, she spoke directly to Dr. Harkin. "Elise, I need the reactor at maximum, or we're toast. This is our only shot." Elise hesitated. Pushing the reactor to full meant risking meltdown. But hesitation could mean the annihilation of countless innocents. "Aye, Captain," she said softly, and slammed her hand down on the override controls. Power surged. The Devastator's hull vibrated from the violent escalation of energy. Sigliota fought to keep the cooling protocols balanced. Glowing readouts warned them the reactor was teetering on the edge of catastrophic failure. But with a shared, unspoken resolve, the crew pressed on. "Fire!" Aurelia commanded. The quantum lance beams erupted from the Devastator, slicing through the ion storm and lancing straight into the Worldbreaker's primary guns. A chain reaction of arcs danced along the Dalek vessel's hull. Before Kul could unleash his doomsday volley, the Worldbreaker's entire midsection erupted in a fireball. In one agonized moment, the biggest weapon in the Dalek arsenal was neutralized. Relief washed over the Devastator's bridge. The once overwhelming Dalek armada now floundered in disarray. Commander Voss exhaled, cracking a grin. "Guess the Dalek just learned that bigger doesn't always mean better, Captain." Aurelia leaned back in her chair, sweat on her brow. "Now they know what it means to challenge humanity. Let's push them out of the Bylora sector for good." As the Devastator led a final sweeping assault, a single victory burned across the stormy skies of Esmir Prime, one that proved, once and for all, the Dalek might have dominated countless worlds, but they'd never faced a warship quite like this. The Scientist and the Stowaway. In the aftermath of the Worldbreaker's destruction, the Dalek fleet retreated, limping away with their tails tucked as far as reptilian alien anatomy would allow. The Bylora colonies erupted into celebrations. Meanwhile, within the dimly lit corridors of the Devastator, Dr. Elise Harkin found herself eyeing the Quantum Cascade Reactor's diagnostic logs. With the immediate threat over, she felt a new weight settle on her shoulders, a dread that one day, some overzealous commander might push the Devastator's systems too far, turning it into a cataclysm for everyone involved. Her invention was a double-edged sword, salvation when used responsibly, a cosmic scale bomb if misused. Sigliota appeared behind her with a half-smile, his voice subdued. "We made it." Those three words carried the relief of someone who had faced the Dalek's atrocities firsthand. Yet under the surface lurked a residue of fury. Vengeance might have been his initial motivation, but as he'd witnessed the selfless bravery of Captain Morrow and Dr. Harkin, something in him had shifted. Perhaps retribution alone couldn't mend old wounds. It might just create more. Elise looked at Sig, remembering how she'd once fantasized about using her reactor to single-handedly dismantle the Dalek war machine, just to prove a point. "I don't think I could have managed those reactor spikes without you," she admitted softly. "We came dangerously close to meltdown. Another second or two, and we'd be stardust." She exhaled, placing a hand over her chest. "We need to set stricter protocols. There's a difference between using power to defend and letting it run rampant." Sig nodded, the glow of flickering overhead lights reflecting in his determined eyes. "No argument here. But next time the Daleks show up, I hope they realize humans aren't just pushovers. We can be downright assholes if you piss us off enough." Elise laughed, a sound that bounced off the steel walls. In that moment, a shaky bond of shared purpose took root. She'd keep the reactor's destructive potential on a leash. Sig, with his tragic past and unwavering will, would ensure no one forgot what the Dalek had done, and why Earth's technology was forged in the fires of necessity, not greed. Alien allies in the shadows. Elsewhere aboard the Devastator, in a briefing room still littered with the remnants of hasty battle planning, Captain Aurelia Morrow met with Counselor Nalia Rekari, an alien with pale lilac skin and eyes that shone like polished onyx. Nalia represented the Underground Coalition, a network of rebel cells across Dralek-occupied worlds. She had watched the Devastator's triumphant standoff against the Dralek with equal measures of amazement and envy. "It's clear we cannot defeat the Dralek alone," Nalia said, folding her slender arms. "But your warship, you've done more in a single engagement than my people have managed in years." Aurelia poured 2 glasses of a Terran beverage rumored to be so strong it could cleanse engine rust. "Counselor, humanity's just getting started. We might have kicked Dralek scales once, but they'll regroup. They always do." Nalia's voice lowered. "That's why we want to share intelligence with you. We have hidden routes, infiltration methods, sabotage teams across multiple sectors. All we need is an ally with the firepower to stand against Dralek overlords." Aurelia took a sip, hissing slightly at the burn. "Then we have a deal. Keep us informed, and we'll be your hammer. But do me a favor, don't keep us in the dark. The Devastator can do plenty on its own, but wars aren't won by one unstoppable cannon. We need trust, alliances, a few cunning moves that hit the Dralek right where it hurts." Nalia's lips curved in a small smile. "Thank you, Captain. The galaxy's been waiting for a wild card like humanity. We just didn't know when you'd show up." A new dawn in the Bylora sector. Days later, the Bylora sector was still rebuilding. Freed laborers and liberated citizens offered tearful thanks to any human in uniform they could find. For the first time in a century, the local worlds felt the warmth of hope. And perhaps a little mischievous relief that the Dralek had finally met a foe worse than their collective hangover after a night of drunken looting. Captain Aurelia Morrow stood on the observation deck with Commander Rhett Voss, surveying the planet of Bylora Prime below. Pillars of smoke marked recent battle sites, but there were also signs of reconstruction in progress. "We've turned the tide," she murmured, "at least here." Voss gave a half-smirk. "The Dralek hate losing. They'll come crawling back like an ex who's discovered you've got a bigger paycheck now. But next time, we'll be ready." Aurelia nodded. "I'll coordinate with the Council of Earth to send relief and protect these worlds. Meanwhile, the Devastator has a date with the Dralek in the next sector over." A faint beeping from her communicator cut the moment short. Dr. Elise Harkin's voice crackled through. "Captain, you need to see this. I've just analyzed some Dralek data the rebels acquired. They're massing forces near the Carthros Nebula." Aurelia's heart pounded. The threat never ended. She turned to Voss with the ghost of a wry grin. "Looks like we're not getting that vacation, are we?" He shrugged. "Saving galaxies is a full-time gig, Captain." Final note. On that day, the Dralek learned what countless species had begun whispering across the cosmos: humanity was not just another footnote in galactic history. They were a rising power, armed with bold technology and a spirit that refused to break. The entire galaxy once feared the Dralek Armada, until one human warship showed up and proved that sometimes it only takes a single spark to set the stars ablaze.